So we need to wait a few minutes for people to jump on the call. Great. Good morning. Starting to get a few people into the call bright and early. Just going to wait a couple minutes for more people to join us. So my name is Amanda McDonald. I'm an Economic Development Officer with the City of St. Albert. For the people in the room, maybe if you want to mention to Margot what industry you're in. And I know that throughout the presentation, she's going to maybe be stopping and asking if you have any questions. So I'll start at the beginning of our list. Christine Beveridge. I think I've unmuted your mic if you want to mention what industry you're in. I also have a chat feature below. So if you can type throughout the session in questions, if you don't want to speak up and raise your hand, you can type your questions into the chat bar and I can relay them to Margot. Neela Casanova, are you able to chat? If you want to type your the industry that you're in the chat bar, then that might be helpful for Margot to understand kind of your background and maybe give examples for your industry as well. Hi, Neela.
You can see us?
Sorry?
We are from St. Louis Bar and Grill.
Bar and Grill. Okay, perfect. So restaurants. So we have some of those industries popping up in the chat bar as well. Perfect. So I think we've got some more attendees on the call now. We're at 8:04. I will make my introduction to myself again and to Margot Ross-Graham. My name is Amanda McDonald. I'm an Economic Development Officer with the City of St. Albert Business Retention and Expansion Program. Happy Small Business Week to all the small business owners in the room. And we're running some webinars this week and one next week as well. There's also some webinars running with the Chamber of Commerce. And we have Margot Ross-Graham with us. So Margot Ross-Graham is the founder and owner of Sandbar Coaching and Consulting based in Edmonton, Alberta. So through Sandbar, Margot is a highly experienced business coach, strategic planning facilitator, and most notably a business ethnographer. So Margot held many senior executive roles with small and medium-sized Alberta business companies and has experience in leading change and process improvement initiatives. She's a certified executive coach and specializes in human resources, leadership, integration, and organizational development. She is an instructor with the University of Alberta Executive Program. And I don't know if this is still the case, Margot, you'll have to let us know, but you can catch her every Tuesday as the workplace columnist on CBC Radio Edmonton's morning show. Wonderful. So I will kick things off to you, Margot, and to get us started. For all the attendees in the room, feel free to type your questions or raise your hand in the chat bar, and I will do my best to allow you to talk and unmute your mics. If not, please just type the questions in the chat bar and I can relay them for you.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, Amanda, I do the workplace column alternating Tuesdays. So Tuesday mornings at 7:50, feel free to join and talk a little bit about some of the challenges workplaces have. And actually, just last week, I talked about this very topic. So I am very happy to be here with all of you this morning at bright and early on a Wednesday morning. And as Amanda said, we're here to talk about interviewing in a COVID environment. When the City of St. Albert contacted me, we talked a lot about what some of the needs were that small and businesses were having. And it seems to some people, this seems like a contradictory need given the current environment that we're in and the unemployment challenges that we're facing in Alberta. But as it turns out, there are still many industries that are really struggling to find employees. And so that's what prompted us to get together with you today. And I see that from the chat box, there's a couple restaurants here, a couple of municipal governments here, and there's probably any other number of organizations. And so our goal today is to talk to you about what are some of the challenges that organizations face when they're interviewing or even going through the interview process from start to finish in this COVID environment. And there absolutely are some unique components of it, but there's also some things that are the same. So that's what we're going to talk about. What we know from the Alberta labor stats is there are right now, despite a high unemployment numbers in Alberta, there's also a couple of industries or quite a few industries that are really struggling to find people. And here's some of them that we know to be true right now. Education, of course, recreational services are a struggling industry to find good employees, retail sales, retail supervisors, transportation in any variety of transportation, that it could be in actual operators, it could also be in supervisors and management, customer and information service representatives and customer and information services supervisors, and then the food services. And what's interesting about this time is it's both supervisory and non-supervisory that is struggling looking for employees. So we're going to look at different ways to approach each of those groups. So today's example of this webinar is going to be a little bit similar to what you might experience interviewing in this time, which is it's low touch and high visual interaction. And so it does cause for some different nuances that I'd really like to chat through as we go through today's session. And I know that you have muted mics, but I am going to give you a chance along the way to ask your questions so that I can actually answer something specific to you rather than a very high level general process. I'd like to be able to answer questions that you might have very specific to your industry and challenges that you are facing. So what we're going to talk about today is actually the process for recruiting. And of course, we are going to dig into the interviewing process and what's different and unique. But one of the challenges that employers maybe don't always fully understand is that the interview process starts long before the actual in-person discussion or in-person call, or even the posting of your ad. And so what I'd like to do is walk through the steps of the interviewing or recruiting process and try to give you some ideas in each step along the way that might help you when you're thinking about the challenges that you're facing. So this is what we call the recruitment cycle for some of my colleagues who are in municipal government in the recruiting area. This is not a surprise to you. You've seen this many, many times, and probably you as employers have seen it as well. Typically, what I'd encourage employers to do is at every step of the way, take a look at how are they fitting into this cycle? Where are their challenges? And then focus your attention on working through challenges in each of those cycles. So preparing for the process of a recruitment, then you actually have to source the candidates. So where are you finding these people who in this environment, in these industries are having a really hard time finding people who want to come and work in these industries? Then screening the candidates. How do you figure out who to actually interview? What you don't want to do is interview 100 people, even though you might have 100 applicants, but you also have to think very carefully about who do I screen out and who do I screen in. And in this environment, because your pool is broader than it might have been in the past, people who you may have screened out of your process in the past, you might want to think about screening in. So we'll talk a little about that. And then actually selecting your candidates. So this is more around that interview process, how you would prepare for that, types of questions that you might want to ask. Then you actually are doing the offer. And so encouraging them to come and stay and work with you. And then finally, once you've hired them and they're on your team, how do you onboard them with the goal of keeping them? Because what we do know about hiring employees, it usually takes on average, depending on the level in an organization, about 6 months for an employee to be up and running and fully functioning in your workplace. So if you take a 6 month salary, that's generally the cost of hiring in an organization. That doesn't even include the costs associated with people not being there. So if you're looking to hire an employee and you know that it's going to be at least 6 months of salary to get them up and running, that's the rough costs of hiring, you want to keep that person for a lot longer than 6 months. So this next step in this onboarding process becomes really, really, really important to you. So we're going to move into the process. So the preparing. So an interesting perspective around the recruitment process is that it actually starts long before you actually need an employee. And what I mean by that is thinking about your reputation and your brand becomes likely one of the most critical components of the process. How are you viewed in the marketplace? What are you known for? What would drive people to want to work for you? But at the same time, what are some of the previous behaviors, actions, things that have occurred in your company and or your industry that would make people say, I really don't want to work for that organization? So your reputation in the community, a small community, Alberta is a small community relative to a lot of places, and we're talking about in and around the Edmonton area, St. Albert, Fort Saskatchewan. That's a small community, and people know a lot about what it is to work in your organization by how you treat your employees, how you recruit your employees, how you end relationships with your employees. So I would really, really encourage you, prior to actually even posting an ad for any type of role, think about, what do we want to be known for? How are we demonstrating that to the general public, to our customers, and to our employees? And what are the things that maybe don't reflect well on us that we have to fix? So your reputation is a critical component of the recruiting process. I'm sure many of you are aware of Glassdoor, which is an online site that allows employees to rate their experience in any company in pretty much anywhere. Something I would really encourage you to do is take a look at your Glassdoor ratings, because they are very, very accurate from a potential employee's perspective. So they will look at, potential employees will go in and look at Glassdoor and try to find out, what is it like to work in that organization? What would it be like to work in that restaurant, St. Louis, rather than another restaurant? What would it be like to work in Fort Saskatchewan versus St. Albert municipality? So the Glassdoor rating is a huge part of your preparation process. And if it is a positive, then I would encourage you to reflect that in your recruitment ads. If it is a negative, then I would encourage you to go and dig in a little bit deeper and try to figure out what happened and what might we do differently. So really important for you to think about, what is your reputation? A Glassdoor rating. So a Glassdoor rating, I'm just seeing the question here. That is, as I mentioned, an online platform. So you can Google Glassdoor and your company name, and it would give you a chance to see what are current or ex-employees saying about what it's like to work in your organization. So it's pretty simple. And what I have observed is employees do complete the Glassdoor rating. Unfortunately, negative ratings seem to be higher than positive ratings, and that's often in any kind of rating environment. When people have something bad to say, they tell the world, and when they have things good to say, they keep it to themselves. But I really encourage you, go and look into your Glassdoor rating. So that's one really important tip. The other thing in terms of preparing for the actual interviewing is I would encourage you to think about what are the role and how has it changed from the last time we were recruiting? And so what's really important about that part of the process is many times when you're looking for a new employee, it's for a role that you're familiar with or a role that you've had in the past. So you simply take that role or that old recruitment ad and post it in whatever environment it is that you want to try to find an employee. However, in the past 7 months, 8 months now, it would be fair to say that every role has changed in some way, shape, or form. And so you want to make sure that the role you're recruiting to is actually the role you want to fill, not the position that you had in the past that has changed. So in preparation for your recruitment process, take a look at the job. What are the skills, abilities, and knowledge that this job needs that it didn't need the last time we recruited to this job pre-pandemic, even the last time we recruited to this job in the first 2 or 3 months of a pandemic versus the job that we're recruiting to right now. So there may be subtle changes that you want to include. Now is the time to include that. And the really critical component of including that now is when you're recruiting, you're more likely to recruit to the actual role than the old position. And it also allows you to open up the people who would apply for that job. So take a look at every role that you're posting for. And that can be anything from a frontline food services person to a frontline retail services person to a recreation coordinator or to an administrator in an office. The jobs have changed for sure. Even if you think they haven't, there's definitely a subtle change. So make sure you're recruiting to the right role, and that will allow you to get a broader pool of candidates. The next thing you want to think about is, are the skills, abilities, and knowledge that we need now similar or different than what they were in the past? And make sure you highlight those in a profile. The reason that I encourage you to do that is people will look to what are the skills, abilities, and knowledge that this role needs that may be unique or different from another role. And that's what they'll be applying for. We're seeing, yes, that employees are applying for any job, but we're also seeing that employees are able to be a little bit more picky about the roles that they're applying for. And so you want to be specific about that. It also wastes less of your time and less of the potential candidate's time if you're clear about what it is that you're looking for. So preparing for the process, what's your reputation? What do people see you as? How would you be known in the environment? What is the actual role that you're preparing for, which might be the same or different from the exact same job 6 months ago? And what are the skills, abilities, and knowledge? So that's the preparation phase of the process. And then what we look at is, okay, well, where am I going to find all these people? So if we look at some of the stats, there were several industries that had a lot of jobs that they just simply couldn't fill. So service roles in restaurants, service roles in retail, administrative roles, as we said, recruitment to recreation roles, recreation consulting, recreation facility roles, educational assistance in a variety of different environments. We're having a hard time finding people. So where are the typical places of sourcing candidates? So none of this will be new or different to most of you. Of course, job boards, which would be Monster or Indeed. In the Alberta market, I find for almost any role that's junior to a director or an executive, the Indeed job boards are very, very helpful, and we get lots of really, really good candidates no matter what your industry. So I would say look at those job boards. Something that employers are telling me and recruiters are telling me is they are using job boards way more than they had in the past, and they're posting multiple roles. And what's interesting about that is you would know more than anybody as recruiters in your organization that the best candidates come from referrals. And the fact that people are putting more time into job boards is a switch in a trend that we've seen in the past, because most people would say you get your job by a network and someone that you know or somebody that refers you to that company. The same thing goes, you find your employees through referrals. So will your employees tell somebody to come and work for you? Will a customer tell somebody what it was like to be in your environment, and therefore maybe it's a good place to work if you're looking for a job? So referrals are still powerful, but job boards are really, really powerful right now because people have had more time online to be looking at them than they have in the past. social media. So 84% of recruiting, either recruiters or in-house people in organizations, stat recently came out that said 84% of organizations are using social media channels more than they have in the past. And that channel can be anything from Twitter to Instagram to Facebook, if you will, but also LinkedIn, which is a very common social media platform. The interesting thing about LinkedIn is in the past, it tended to be more of the what we would call office professional roles. And we're seeing that that's switching up, that any role in any organization, any industry is seeing a lot more activity on the LinkedIn website. So I would encourage you, what's your platform like and how are you using some of these social media channels? Something that's changed, I would say, in the environment is the use of texting for sourcing candidates. In the past, people would not have thought of texting an individual to ask them if they'd be interested in coming in for an interview or even interested in talking to you about a role. But this is also one of the platforms that we're seeing a huge increase in sourcing. Before I just go on a little bit further, I'm just wondering, does anyone have a question about or comment on success or failures they've had in any of these areas around sourcing candidates, or if they have a question on how they might access some of these platforms? And I'll just give you a minute before I move on.
Attendees can raise their hand in the chat or in the side panel, and I can let them speak, or you can feel free to write your questions in the chat or the Q&A box.
Okay, I'll carry on, but also just stop anytime and put up a hand or ask a question. So now we're into the next phase of this process in the interviewing. We call the screening process, not a uncommon name, but there are three components of a screening process that I'd really encourage you to think about differently in this environment than you might have in the past. And this is an environment where it is something to think about, where you would consider putting a square peg in a round hole. Whereas in the past, we would say, no, you don't ever want to try to put someone in the wrong role. And I'm not suggesting that this is an opportunity to put the wrong person in the wrong role, but I am suggesting that you as an employer might want to think about how are you accessing transferable skills to bring people into your organization or your industry that you might not have thought of in the past. If you are having a hard time recruiting in your own industry, then there's a whole other pool of talent that you might want to be looking out to. And how could they use the skills or the experience they've had in one industry and apply it to your industry? So we have, if you have any technology, I don't know how many of you use resume parsing in your organization to try to expedite the process of looking through screening applicants. But I would encourage you to think about what are the keywords that you are using for the roles that you're trying to recruit to, and could you expand them just a little bit in order to try to get a little bit more information about the candidate. And yes, Sneda, thank you very much. The government of Alberta does help employers post their jobs. It's a free service, so I'd really encourage you use that free service because many people are looking to the government of Alberta job boards for sure. Thank you. And when you're using that service, then I would say look at your keywords, because if you have any kind of a parsing service, candidates that might be really, really good for the job might be getting screened out before you even have a chance to look at them. So if you think back to that preparation phase, what are the skills, abilities, and knowledge that you need? Make sure that your job ad has those skills, abilities, and knowledge. And then when your service parses the resume in, you'll make sure you're seeing a broader range of candidates. Think about, again, those transferable skills. So if you are in the industry of, let's say, the food services or in a restaurant industry, and you're thinking about what are this kind of the qualities of people that I'm looking for, you would typically say customer service, sales expertise. But you might also think about, what about project management skills or what about skills related to resiliency under pressure, which may or may not be a typical thing that you look for in an ad. when you're looking for food services. But if you think about what that environment is like right now, it is a high pressure environment, dealing possibly with people who are fearful or stressed. Employees might be fearful or stressed. So having individuals that are comfortable in a high stress environment may be really good candidates for your industry that you might not have thought about before. So these transferable skills become really, really significant. Also, the talent pool is expanded. And this is an interesting piece of data that we know. People are applying for jobs that in the past they may not have applied for because people are looking for work. For you as an employer, one of the common recruitment, things that recruiters tell me when they're looking for candidates that they often screen out a candidate who they believe is overqualified for a job in fear that that individual will just simply leave as soon as they find something better. And that may be true, but the flip side of it is it really our role to screen those candidates out before we even have a chance to talk to them? Because we really don't know what people's lived experience is. If you find a candidate that has skills, abilities, and expertise that really could help your industry, have a conversation with them. Don't screen them out, because you could be losing a massive number of candidates that in the past you would have passed over, but now you actually really need. And so what I'm thinking about there is maybe you have somebody who's been in a more supervisory role, who's looking for a role or applied for a role that would be considered more frontline in their nature. And so you think, oh, well, they don't want to be a frontline employee. They've already done that. What you don't know is maybe they actually didn't like being a supervisor. Maybe they recognize that this is a change in industry for them and they're looking for a new opportunity. Why would we not even talking to them if we think that they really could bring a good opportunity to us? The other thing that you can think about is when you go back to that preparation phase, and what's your reputation known for? Are you an organization that's known for creating a career for an employee, or are you an organization that's known for creating a job? If you're an organization that's known for creating a career, you might find that you hire somebody in a more junior role who really wants to stay in a long period of time and see themselves grow with your company. And this is a great way for them to do it. So don't screen out people before you've even talked to them. So once you get past the screening process, then the selection process becomes an interesting part of a part of the environment. And this is where a lot of people are struggling right now, because what they're trying to do is find candidates that they may not have ever actually met in person. There is a huge increase in the number of new employees that are hired via an online platform, never having been in the work environment. And in some cases, depending on the type of industry they're working in, never even met the people that they're working with. And so the selection process becomes even more complicated. So some tips I'd encourage you to think about in the selecting process. In the past, when we have used through the selection, organizations have used telephone interviews as what we would call the screening out process. So you would get a telephone interview first. The telephone interview would be pretty quick. You would ask the candidate 3 or 4 questions. And often employers would think of that as a chance to screen people out versus screen people in, with the intent that, well, if I really like this person, I'll bring them into the office and I'll bring them into the workplace. I'll bring them into the store or the restaurant and interview them. However, with the move to online platforms and the need to be interviewing people from a distance, the telephone interview, you might think about that as your great opportunity to screen people into your environment as opposed to screen them out. So I would encourage you to eliminate the telephone interview thinking of being a 10 or 15 minute discussion and think about, how can I get the most out of this time? Because this might be the only time I have to talk to this individual. Interviewing online can and will take as long as interviewing in person. So when you're preparing to have a discussion with a candidate, expect that you are going to spend a significant amount of time in the process, whether it's on the phone or whether it's on an online platform. I'm just going to take a minute for a second. I had a question about what kinds of questions do you ask if you're asking in a telephone interview. So in this environment, what I'd encourage you to think about is, are you using that telephone interview as your main interview? So are you down to the wire of talking to 3 or 4 candidates on the same role? Or are you using it as an opportunity to screen, talk about 8 or 10 people to try to narrow it down. So I'll ask you that question. I'll be just a little bit more specific on how you're using them. But typically you would ask them questions related to the work that they've done in the past, associated this work, their interest in the organization, and work that they've done that would apply to this organization as well. If it's your main interview, then I would say you're asking the exact same questions that you would in a typical main interview. And so you are wanting to ask not, pardon me, not questions about, why they like, what's important about what they like about the organization or what their history or experiences is, but more give them some opportunity to do behavioral answering questions that show you and show them that they can do this work. So can you share an example with me about a time when you worked in a like industry and when you came to a customer service problem that wasn't going well, what did you do? So we can actually talk about, maybe I'll put that to the end of this, to the next one you're doing the actual hiring, maybe 2 or 3 questions if people have about how to ask in behavioral questions, or what are the most powerful behavioral questions for different industries. Maybe we can, I'll give you a chance to ask some of those questions and see if I can respond to them. But if you're using them, so back to the main interview, if the telephone is your main interview process, treat it exactly the same as if you were meeting the person in person. Ideally, you would move to an online format so you could actually see each other. It's always better to be able to see body language and get a sense of the person. You can build a different kind of connection, but plan to spend the time. One of the worst things that I find employers do is if you set up an interview with an individual and then you don't spend the time to actually get to know them, that is a big red flag for an employee against wanting to work for that company. If you're going to spend the time to talk to them and you won't give them 15 or 20 minutes, whether or not you think they're a great candidate, it's going to take you a little bit longer than 5 minutes to know that. So spend some time with the individual. Expect the technology to fail. So even this morning, Amanda and I, we got on the call, 20 minutes earlier, and there was some technology glitches that we had to work out even before we started the conversation this morning. So you can expect that no matter what platform you're using, the technology will fail. And this is quite different than the experience of in-person interviewing, because when in-person interviewing, we don't tend to expect failures or expect glitches. And so as a person interviewing a candidate, when they're not performing to the highest level that you would want, employers will often think about that as a reason not to recruit or not to hire that person. In this environment, everybody's learning the environment. Not everybody has the best bandwidth to be having these kinds of interviews. Your technology might fail, their technology might fail. One of the things candidates tell us is with the online environment, it's allowing employers to come into their own home rather than them going into the employer's home. And that's making people uncomfortable. So often they don't want to use their videos. So I would say cut your candidates slack in a way that you might not typically have done that in an in-person interview. Another thing you might think about is if they can't come to your environment for an interview, consider simulating the space where they'll be working. And what I mean by that is in a normal environment, when we interview candidates, we say, oh, go to an office that's quiet, that there's not going to be a lot of distractions, and have a conversation with the individual. But if you're hiring somebody to work in a retail environment, I would encourage you to do your interviewing in a quiet time, but in that retail environment space, so that the individual can see where they're working, what they'd be doing, what the environment looks like. Or if it's going to be on a shop floor, do it in that environment. If it's going to be in a manufacturing location, do your interview in the actual space where the individual is working. Whether or not they're going to actually meet you in that environment, that's different, but at least they have a sense of what that environment looks like. So simulate the space, which is quite different than what we encourage people to have done in the past. And then again, in terms of the questions, be really clear on what are the skills, abilities, and knowledges that you're looking for, and then formulate questions around that. Candidates are expecting more than ever you to ask them experiential, or what we call behavioral questions, as opposed to why do you want to work for this company? Tell me about the jobs that you've had in the past. You don't have a lot of time to make an impression on the employee, and they don't have a lot of time to make an impression on you. So try to avoid asking questions that just cause them to regurgitate what's on their application or on their resume, but ask them questions that would give you a chance to see them in action. So an example might be in a manufacturing situation. Give me an example of a time when you worked in a similar industry and you were responsible for dealing with a conflict with another teammate in a closed environment space. Tell me about that conflict and how did you manage it? As opposed to, what's your thoughts on conflict? So think about, how do I get these questions in, these people showing me their work in action? Does anyone have any other questions around? I'm just going to look at the chat. Does anyone have any questions related to the types of interviews, or maybe how to formulate an interview question to get answers that you're looking for? Okay, I'm going to carry on and encourage you to come back to those questions when you have time. Okay, so let's see. Now you're going to the hiring process. Now, right now, more than ever, you have to be as ready to impress a candidate as a candidate is ready to impress you. In the past, we have always said the candidates sell their story to us. You are in an environment now where you need to sell your story to the candidate. Why would somebody want to work for you versus work for somebody else? So what is your story? What are the careers opportunities you have for that individual? How would that individual be able to excel in your environment versus another environment? What we're seeing from candidates, given the environment that they're in right now, we have individuals that are saying, I want to work for an organization where I actually can earn a good living, earn a living. And I don't necessarily need to do that right now, well, particularly if I get additional benefits from other government sources. But what I do want to do, I really do want to work. So in this employer, how are you going to make that work more interesting for me? Tell your story. What is the history of working in your organization? What are your health and safety benefits that you've put in place? How are you training and developing your employees? How could you create a career for somebody in this organization versus just a job for them? And you want to sell your total compensation, because employees are saying that, I can move jobs quickly as soon as the environment changes. And there's more jobs out there for me. So if I came to work for your organization and maybe I came for a little less money, why would I stay with you? Well, you would stay for a whole bunch of reasons that are unrelated to money. You would stay for training and development. You would stay for opportunities for growth. You would stay for working in an organization with a culture that treats people well, aligns with values, is good for the community. There's a whole bunch of reasons that people stay with a company that are unrelated to salary. And so what I'd encourage you is, when you're selling your story, sell your what we call total compensation. People looking for money is absolutely, a dollar is absolutely a point of entry in any organization. But we know that in a scale of 1 to 10, cash only is about 8 on the reasons to stay in an organization. So you want to think about, what are all the other reasons that someone might stay working for your company? That even it will include, what's it like to work for the boss in this company? What kind of supervisory leader? We know that people join companies and leave bosses. So what kind of supervisory development do you have? How do you create cultures in your organization that help people learn and grow? So impress the employee more so than you'd expect them to impress you. Sell your story, what makes you unique and different, and offer your total compensation package. So I just noticed a question. Someone asked, I like how you explained working in action. Does that mean giving scenarios? Yes, exactly. What that means is you want the employee to give you a scenario of what it looks like to see them doing the job. And so I would encourage you to think about questions that cause people to pause and then tell their story, but not a what if story, but a what was story. So what we know about behavioral interviewing or scenario-based interviewing is people are more likely to do what they did in the recent past again. And so you want to find an example of a recent past story. So I would say, yes, give the employee a scenario of what it would be like in your environment. And then ask the employee, can you tell me about a time where you found yourself in a similar situation? What did you do? What was the success? What outcome did you have? With these kinds of scenario-based questions, you can expect candidates to have to pause and think a little bit longer on their answer. And that's actually a really good thing. And the reason that I say that's a good thing is because if a potential candidate can give you the answer very, very quickly, then probably they've practiced their answer and it may not be as real or as lived as an example that caused them to stop and think. And so remember, people looking for a job, it's their job to look for a job. So they are working really, really hard to impress you and sell themselves to you. So you need to look really, really hard to get the exact information that you're looking for. So yeah, scenario-based questions become really important. If you want, I would encourage you, Google behavioral interviewing questions for retail, behavioral interviewing questions for recreation, behavioral interviewing questions for customer service roles, for manufacturing roles, for transportation roles. There are a plethora of examples online, and I would encourage you to Google those and see if you can find one that works for you. If you're a small business and you're not able to offer career advancement, how can you attract employees? So I would say that you can, maybe your career advancement isn't a lateral, but you could offer career advancement, isn't a vertical, but it can be career advancement from the perspective of a lateral relationship. You get to learn new skills, new opportunities, you get to work in a new industry, you get to work with a great team. So absolutely, career advancement is something that people like, but people also like training and development. People also like the opportunity to work and meet with new people. Not everybody has to advance, but they do want to have a fulfilling career. So again, back to selling your total compensation. If there's only 6 people in your office, it may not be that you're going to become, in a small business, even 50 people. It's not necessarily that you're going to become one of 2 managers or one of 2 directors, but you might get to explore 3 or 4 different aspects of that business that you might not get to do in a larger organization where everybody is siloed into the skills, abilities, and knowledge that they have. So that's a huge sell for a small business. Give people the opportunity to learn about a bigger aspect of your pie. I hope that answers that question. If not, for sure, send me another one and I'll respond to that. And then the onboarding. So this is the last phase of the interview process. And this is really important for employees, because what I've found out in my research, that employees looking for jobs are asking 4 typical questions. And one of the questions is, how are you going to onboard me in this environment? What you want to think about in a small business is, how can you make sure that you get people the information they need to be up and running and do their job quickly, even if you've never met them in person, and even if they might not ever come into your space. So if you happen to be in an industry where people are working from home, how do you get them the information quickly so that they can actually do the job as fast as possible? But how do you make sure it's the same for the individuals who are working maybe out in the field or in your store or in your restaurant? So you want to make sure that it's consistent and it's fast. Another thing you might think about is many people looking for roles right now are looking at how you might be using technology differently than you have in the past. Every organization's had to ramp up their technology skills. So are you providing possibly gamification of onboarding, giving people the opportunity to do quick, simple tests, if you will, of their knowledge of the organization that allows them to advance through a game or competition with other people in the organization, but doing it via technology so that they can embed their learning in a new way, but be up and running really quickly. And then how is your organization values driven? Sharing that with your employees. You can't always share culture in this environment because people aren't connecting quite the same way, but you can share your values and you can live and breathe that through the onboarding process. What employees are telling us is that they will join organizations that align with their values. Questions that you should expect. So typically in an interview process, employees we're asking all the questions. some things that employees are asking when they're looking for jobs and things that you should be prepared. What are the tools and technology requirements of this individual, and are you providing it, or is the individual expected to provide it? What are your closing or reopening policies? So if something happens from a health and safety perspective, or you do have any kind of requirement to isolate employees or the organization overall, what are your policies associated with that? Potential individuals want to know what is going to be like to work there, and are you going to keep me safe? What are your health and safety protocols? Different than previous, even in the last 6 months, it used to be that health and safety was in the purview of what we would call typical organizations having challenges associated with, say, maybe manufacturing, lots of slips and falls, that you could actually get hurt in a more traditional way on the job. With the advance of COVID, every organization has a health and safety challenge, and employees want to know, what are you doing to keep them safe? One of the biggest barriers for employees to going back in the workplace is that they're fearful of getting the infection, being impacted by the infection, or maybe being exposed to the infection, which might expose their family. So this question is becoming more and more powerful. And if you can't answer it quickly and with succinct responses, that'll be a red flag for employees. And then again, what are your onboarding and training practices? What do employees, what can they expect to help them get up and running really quickly? As an employer who's having a difficult time looking for employees, these 4 questions or contents have become the most important questions that employees are going to be asking you, and your response to them could be the make or break in your employee process. So make sure you're able to respond to that. So I just want to give you a chance. I'm just conscious of time, and we're at 3 minutes. So Amanda, I didn't leave too much time for questions at the end, but does anyone have any last minute questions or thoughts that might help them, or things that they were hoping to get about that we haven't covered yet? No? Okay. So just by way of let's see here, just by way of a final review. How can employees alleviate concerns about COVID, especially for retail and food industry? Yeah, so this is really important. So in these industries, retail and food, this is one of the challenges that people are having recruiting employees, because employees are fearful of coming into those environments. So what are your health and safety protocols? You know, what is the history you've had with dealing with the virus? Because we're all going to be impacted. How do you treat employees when they are on their 14-day isolation? Are you alienating them from your organization, or are you checking in to make sure that everything's okay and you're looking forward to having them come back? What tools do you give them in terms of helping them keep themselves safe? Are you providing them any of the PPE, or are you expecting them to provide it all themselves? So think about, where are the touch points that individuals could be impacted from a health and safety perspective, and then make sure you have protocols in place that you can execute on very, very quickly. But tell that to your candidates. Tell that right up front. That's a reason for them to come work for you rather than work next door, where they're not being protected and they're not kept safe, or they're treated badly if they happen to have to go off for isolation. So those would be some ideas for small business. So you have the preparation, then you're going to source, you're going to screen candidates in, you are going to select your individuals, hire them by courting them right through till the end, and then onboarding them. And when I say courting them, one of the things I find with employees is that, or employers, is that they are often really courting candidates until they actually offer them the job, and then the employee accepts it, and then they stop really engaging with them. So keeping an employee in your organization for the long term, you need to treat them as well in the organization, in their onboarding and throughout their career, as you did when you were trying to woo them to come and work for you. So that dating period should last long into the marriage of you and that individual in your organization. One of the questions was, in my opinion, what's the best way to put up ads to get resumes? So depending on the industry you're in, I really am amazed at the quality of candidates and the number of candidates that you get when you post things on online platforms like Indeed, LinkedIn. I would say any opportunity you can to use a social media platform, I would do that. But something to think about is the best way to get candidates is to talk to your current employees and have them tell you if there's other people that they know that might be interested. So use your employee network. Indeed is a great one. The government of Alberta is also a really good tool. They give it to you for free. And then the social media platforms that you can use for free. Depending on the industry, I haven't had as good of success with LinkedIn, particularly in frontline roles or trades. Haven't been as powerful using LinkedIn. People don't tend to use it as much, but in office related roles, LinkedIn is a good place to get candidates as well. And kind of an abrupt, we're at the 8:50. I really want to say thank you to all of you for participating today. I appreciate the questions. I know that your time is valuable and that we're at the end of our time together, but I really do hope that you found a few tips. One of these things I find in these webinars, if you take away one really good idea, then your time will have been well spent. And I wish you great success in finding your candidates. And thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much, Margot. And I will follow up with attendees. I think there'll be a survey from the City of St. Albert and the Chamber of Commerce coming soon to all attendees. And if there are any follow-up questions, you can respond to my email and I'll try to get those answered through Margot just on this presentation. We'll also be sharing this live webinar recording with all attendees and those that registered. Have a good rest of your day and happy Small Business Week to everyone. Bye, Margot. Oh.
Did you, have you blocked the others out now?